Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 480 through 482, which will cover manga chapters 571 through 573. And Grandpa Garp is here to lay the smackdown, but will he actually go through with putting down his two grandsons? Alright, so synopsis. Luffy has finally made it to Ace, but he's not out of the woods yet, as his Grandpa Garp and Fleet Admiral Sengoku are still left to deal with, as well as how they'll escape once they get Ace free. Moving on to the differences, there are actually quite a few of them. There's an added scene of Helmeppo crying over Kobe after Luffy just beat the shit out of him. And then there's also another added scene of Hancock kind of fighting off a bunch of Marine soldiers as they're trying to aim for Luffy when he's climbing up the ramp. And they also add some unnecessary boob jiggle physics in there for good measure. I don't know what the hell Toei was doing here, but there is that. And we get a longer flashback of Luffy's childhood with Garp as well. And then another added change is we get to actually see the moment where Galdino makes the decision to uphold Boncre's last wishes and help Luffy save Ace, so as to not dishonor the sacrifice that he made at Impel Down to let them all live. Another difference that was added was there are a couple extra scenes of Luffy and Ace fighting after being freed, including Luffy going Gear Second, which never happens in the manga. Now in the manga they do beat up a few guys, but it's pretty immediate where Aokiji actually ends up confronting them. And so yeah, this scene is just basically longer in the anime. Then the whole added scene where Buggy's compassion leading to getting that Dendemushi to come out, that was all added for the anime, but I love this scene so much, so I don't have any issues with it being included. Now, one interesting change that it's not necessarily a change in the story, it's the change in perspective of Ace getting hit is flipped. So when Akainu, he blasts a hole into Ace, the perspective is actually flipped, and they'll do actually something similar in the next episode in 483 as well. And I wondered about this, and it may be because in the manga, you read it from right to left. So the image in the manga, if you look at it, Akainu is on the right, and Ace is in the center, looking down at Luffy to the left. And in the anime, it's flipped, where Akainu is attacking him from the left, and Ace is looking to his right with Luffy on the ground. Now, I think it's because from like a TV perspective, you're still kind of looking at it from the flow of left to right, whereas manga, like I said, is from right to left. And I think they flipped it so that it would give it a better visual flow, so that when you look at it on screen, your eyes are still looking from left to right, because that's generally what you're expecting, I feel like, even in Japanese media. Although this is all conjecture, I have no way of actually knowing why they did this, but I think that's why. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get into the episodes proper. So we left on that huge cliffhanger from the last episode of Garp now being one of the last few remaining obstacles to Ace, but before that, there's a nice filler scene added for the anime that shows Helmeppo showing some over-the-top concern for the injured Kobe. And I personally really like that they're showing just how great of friends the two have become. Like, despite Helmeppo still coming across as kind of a douche, deep down, he's become a pretty good guy that really cares for his friends, and especially Kobe. And I love that they played this up and developed it more in the live action series right from the beginning too, because I think it is an important relationship that's actually very present throughout the entire series. It's also great that these two spearhead the next generation of Marines too, since they both show the compassionate side and aren't afraid to show emotion, unlike the current Marines, where it's dominated by sort of this machismo and unfeelingness like you see with Akainu, or even Sengoku to a certain extent. I think Sengoku has a little bit more compassion and a little less like brutality compared to Akainu, but he's still pretty, very silent on everything. Garp himself is caught between these two worlds at this very moment. And so, yeah, does he keep his emotions out of it and follow his duty, or does he show compassion for his two grandsons? And we see him struggle with this very dilemma, and I think his answer was already determined when we see, how he's raised all of his surrogate and blood-related kids, because Kobe, Helmeppo, Ace, and Luffy are all incredibly compassionate and kind, despite all their various difficult backgrounds. We know that Garp is a tyrant when it comes to like physical training, but when it comes to the mental and emotional side of things, he's actually very fair and good. Garp has always been devoted to the Marines, but he's also not blind to its major flaws. We know it needs to change, but it's not happening in his lifetime. I think that's why he was always so adamant about raising Ace and Luffy to be Marines and so disappointed when they chose to become pirates. He wanted them to be the ones to lead the change and change the Marines for the better. However, he did get a second or perhaps a third chance with Kobe and Helmeppo, and I'll kind of elaborate on that in the spoiler section. But anyways, with that long setup, let's get back to the main event. We get to some emotional flashbacks of Garp's time with Luffy and Ace. Luffy has no choice but to go all out against his grandpa and hit him as hard as he can, while Garp, when it comes time, he can't bring himself to stop Luffy. And one interesting decision they made for the anime is that they make it really obvious that not only did Garp let himself get hit by Luffy, but in the anime they make it clear that the punch really didn't do much to him, as we see him opening his eyes as he's falling like he's totally fine, as he goes crashing into the ground, where in the manga we don't see his face at all after being punched, making it a bit ambiguous as to how much the punch affected Garp, because in the manga, the next time you see Garp, he's already like all bloodied because of basically face planting into the ground, into the concrete, but it's still ambiguous as to whether Luffy caused that or the impact of the ground caused that. But in the anime, it's pretty obvious that the impact with the ground is what caused him to start bleeding profusely from his head. But yeah, after all that struggle and fighting, Luffy has finally reached the platform and Ace. However, there's still one more person he's got to get through, and that is Fleet Admiral Sengoku. And we finally get to see his powers, and I was not expecting this at all, and that's an understatement. Like, this took me by complete surprise. Like, we all knew his epithet is Sengoku the Buddha, but I did not think this related to his powers, nor how it literally was related to it. I mean, he literally transforms before our eyes into a massive Daibutsu, or a golden Buddha statue. And so yeah, let's talk about Sengoku's Devil Fruit, because it's one of those fruits that Oda never actually has a character describe it to us in the story, and has only really given us details about it in an SBS from volume 60. So Sengoku possesses the Hito no Mi model Daibutsu, or the human fruit model Daibutsu, which is a mythical zone fruit. And yeah, that's right. In one arc, we went from 0 to 2 mythical zones, including Marco's Phoenix Tori no Mi. And yeah, there's not too much known about the Daibutsu, but I find it comical that there even was another Hito no Mi. But Oda sure showed me as there would be 2 more variations after this point in the series. But anyways, his power set is pretty much still a mystery beyond what we see here, because we never see Sengoku use this ability much beyond this arc. There is one more instance of it where it shows up towards the end of the arc. And yeah, we're still not even sure if what we're seeing here is his hybrid form or his full-on Daibutsu mode. And there's always been that joke answer of like, what would happen if a human ate Chopper's Hito no Mi? And there was always that kind of like joke answer where that person would become enlightened. Of course, that answer is not true, but I feel like this is actually what I would have imagined should that have been the case. And just as an aside though, the whole concept of Oda saying that if a human ate the Hito no Mi would become an enlightened human is not necessarily true. That's kind of an urban legend that's kind of been conflated to this answer. And he never actually said this, and this whole concept arose from a mistranslation in the early days. So in SBS Volume 20, he does answer this question from a fan, but what he actually says is, quote, "Suppose I should say they become human. I guess you could say that means like becoming an adult or finding your true spirit or something. So basically, people will live more human-like. Well, I guess you could say that or not, basically not. Goodbye," and then parentheses, "runs away," end quote. So that's just this really jokey answer. And I think where the confusion came from was the whole finding your true spirit. That was mistranslated as like enlightenment. And so I think that's where that came about. But Yeah, so the whole enlightenment thing is not true, but I always like to imagine that should that have been the case, that the model Daibutsu is what would have happened. Now, Daibutsus are really interesting things in Japan. I mean, they're in Asia, not just strictly Japan, but in Japan they do. There are quite huge ones that are either made of gold or some of them are. I think they're like copper, and they're like kind of, I guess, oxidized to like greenish color too. And there's three very famous ones in Japan. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I know there's one in like Kyoto, and there's another one. I don't remember. But anyways, yeah, I don't really have too much to add to like what a daibutsu is. They're just basically giant Buddha statues. And this allows Sengoku to grow like to the size of like a 3-story building. He pretty much becomes impervious because of the gold plating, and obviously his strength is enhanced. And he has this weird ability where he can like emit shock waves out of his palms that we'll see. And yeah, beyond that, we're not really shown what else the model Daibutsu can actually do. But it is a very interesting fruit that came out of left field. I remember seeing this for the first time and thinking, what? It's so random. But it is a very powerful fruit, though. Getting back to the story, though, Sengoku right on them. Luffy has to hurry and get Ace's cuffs off. But Kizaru shoots the key down, creating another crazy tense moment as there's no way out for them. And now with no key, they're sitting ducks with Sengoku like ready to blast them with his fist. Until, randomly, Galdino is revealed to be one of the replacement executioners and regains his consciousness right then, which is a bit convenient. And so now's a good time to kind of talk about Toei's decision to leave clues and setting this reveal up a bit more. So I mentioned in the last couple podcasts how all those scenes of Galdino sneaking around the base were fillers added in the anime. And really the only clue we get that Galdino is somewhere in the manga is the Impel Down prisoners inform Buggy that after he's been defrosted, that he's gone missing somewhere. Now, in the manga, this reveal came as a complete surprise to most of us. Well, I can't say for certain in the anime. I feel like you'd be able to see this surprise coming after all those scenes setting that up. Now, I think you could argue whether this was a good or bad decision. As how it's originally written, you could seem like an almost like Deus Ex Machina ass pull, while the surprise element is preserved. Or in the anime, you could make it more, set it up more and not as random, but basically kill the surprise. I personally did feel this was an ass pull when I first read it. I didn't really mind it though, because I loved seeing the reveal of Galdino just kind of there. It was like, yes, there's still hope. And it got me very excited at that moment. And I can't really fault the anime either, because it does make more sense when you see the setup to it. However, one thing that never really made sense to me was the moment where Luffy does the Conqueror's Haki, and because he's already up there and he's like getting ready to swing, and he comes within like a few inches. So obviously that moment was set up to create a lot of tension that Ace might get killed there. And then he was knocked out by Luffy's Conqueror's Haki. But if that was truly Galdino, what was his plan? Like, what was he going to do? Was he going to... I guess you could argue that he was going to lay his sword down first to stop the other executioner's blade. But you really don't get the sense the way that it's animated, at least in the anime. Obviously, in the manga, you can't really tell because it's a still image. So he could have done anything after that point, and we would never know. But the way that it's depicted in the anime, it just seems like he was ready to cut Ace's head off. Also, just as a quick aside, the Crunchyroll subs, for some reason, when Luffy tells Galdino to protect Ace with his candle wall, it translates as Luffy calling Galdino san, which yes, is technically correct and what he actually says, but Luffy calls him son because he's actually calling him the Japanese word for 3, which is san. And since that's what Luffy knows him best for, which is that giant 3 that he usually has on his head from his hair. So Luffy's actually saying, hey, 3, protect him with a wall. Otherwise, for non-Japanese speakers, this kind of makes no sense why he calls him san, because san means nothing to a non-Japanese speaker. Another thing that caught my eye about this scene is the addition of the random items that Galdino cycles through before he makes the key. And this was always weird to me in the anime. And to me, I think what they were going for with this scene was that they were trying to convey how scattered his mind is while he's still also fuzzy from being knocked out from the Conqueror's Haki and just from sheer panic of seeing Sengoku attack them in his Daibutsu form all of a sudden. So his mind goes to what he sees around him. So it just starts with Sengoku's goat, then perhaps the little boy is supposed to be Luffy in his chibi form after doing Gear 3rd. But I, for the life of me, cannot figure out what the tomato is supposed to be. Like, that one's just complete random. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it was supposed to be a joke that his mind is so scattered that he just starts thinking of a random fruit, vegetable. I love this next scene though. While in the manga we get that short line about would Luffy laugh if the reason why he was there was out of respect for his fallen comrade, I like that we get to see the moment where he actually made the decision. Like, I love moments like this in One Piece where we see formerly bad guys actually grow and change for the better. And not only that, it was spurred on by the example set by another person's good deeds. And the idea that good deeds have sort of this ripple effect, as in, you can even trace this all the way back to Shanks saves Luffy. Luffy would then go on to defeat Crocodile, save Arabasta, and befriend Mr. 2 Bonkore. Then in turn, he sacrifices himself to save them all at Impel Down, and now Galdino was moved by Bonkore to act selflessly to help another at the risk of his own life. And it's just like this cascading like ripple effect of good deeds just keep going down into the future. And it's something I would have never imagined seeing from the same character we met all the way back in episode 70 on Kyuka Island, which is just wild to me. And you can see this example happening in many different characters, and this theme of good deeds spurring other people to do good deeds is always a very inspirational one, in my opinion. Then we get the moment we've been working towards since episode 408, and out of the smoke, we get the Whitebeard Jolly Roger appear out of flames, which is something they added for the anime, which is really cool. Then a bright flash of flames with Ace and Luffy finally reuniting in the most epic and flashiest way possible, and they did it. Ace is saved. They just need to get the heck out of there, and Toei, to their credit, really bring it for this moment as well. They go above and beyond to animate this as brilliantly as possible. And this moment really is like a shot in the arm, seeing how happy Luffy is and Ace as well, with everyone else reacting to this. And not only that, but I personally love that Ace is voiced by Toshio Furukawa, because he just sounds so awesome playing Ace. Because the other major cool character I've always associated with him ever since I was little is with Piccolo from Dragon Ball. And they both give off this really stern but cool vibe, and it sounds really cool when he yells out Ace's moves. The shift in mood and tone is dramatic, as it has been pretty dour and intense this whole time, with the brutality on both sides to feeling just pure jubilation and excitement now that Ace is free. And just seeing Ace return to his sort of strong and cocky self, with Luffy lighting up as a child, and with that childlike excitement at the sight of seeing his older brother, gives this incredible feeling of fresh air and weight lifted off our shoulders. Like, even though they weren't out of it yet, and it's been heavily foreshadowed that Whitebeard is likely going to sacrifice himself and die, especially with that moment where he stops Squard and his crew from sacrificing themselves, you still got that sense that we're going to, for the most part, make it out with a victory. Unfortunately, we'll see that this was a very cruel and short-lived sense of joy and victory. Now, going back to Whitebeard and Squard, for a second, we got to take a minute to just appreciate how insane Whitebeard is. He freaking stops this massive galleon-sized ship that's barreling down the battlefield with one arm while he's already wounded and weak. And it's here we realize that Whitebeard knows his time is coming to an end and gives his final order for everyone to split up and return to the New World safely. And this moment is significant not just for the fact that we're witnessing the end of one of the greatest pirates in the world, but what he's implying. There was definitely a shift in Whitebeard's attitude once he witnessed Luffy use Conqueror's Haki. Especially, you feel like something changed to the point where he's seen enough to believe that the time has finally come to entrust the world to the next generation, and specifically Luffy. Whitebeard is convinced that Luffy will be the one to carry the torch, and has seen what so many others from his generation have seen, from Shanks, Crocus, and Rayleigh. And after all this drama, we do get a slight reprieve with a fun scene from Buggy. Now, this is mostly a filler scene, like I mentioned in the differences section, but I love this scene showing how the Dendemushi have feelings, and we see it just scared inside its shell. It's like, oh, so sad. But surprisingly, some compassionate and understanding words from Buggy convinces it to come out and help him, even though this is exact opposite of his goal. And I just love how cute the Dendemushi is here in this scene, and I love that they included this. Then we get a heartfelt moment between Whitebeard and Ace as they exchange goodbyes, and this scene is all you really need to understand what kind of person Whitebeard is. You realize the reason why someone this powerful has yet to find the One Piece, and it's because he never wanted it. In the end, all he wanted was to create a family that he loved and cared for. And we even see him completely ignore the treasure and dream about his future family that he'll go on to create during sort of his early days flashback. Whitebeard seems to be overjoyed by the fact that Ace confirms to him that he was a great father. And this was such a beautiful moment, and it gets even more impact after we learn more about Ace throughout the rest of the series. Like this scene, this is one of those scenes that gets better upon rewatch. Even though Ace is deeply grateful and understands the sacrifice that was made for him, his deep-seated, sort of hot-headed nature still gets the better of him, as we see Akainu's shrewd and cunning nature to read his opponents, and hits Ace exactly where he knew it would hurt him the most, by disrespecting his captain and father, leading to a moment that will forever change the course of the events of the entire story. And I will admit, though, listening to Akainu just spout off that amount of shit-talking, you can't really blame Ace, but he should have known that this was a ploy. But for as much as you want to blame Ace for his foolishness here, it's understandable that because of Ace's actions, it's kind of led to putting his beloved father figure in a position where he has to die, probably, creating an immense sense of guilt for which Ace just couldn't let go, that he's the reason that led to Whitebeard's legacy being mocked and cut short. It's kind of poetic irony that the same hot-headed trait that led him to be in this situation by needlessly going after Blackbeard is now putting him and everyone else around him in danger. And it's even sadder that the reason for this sort of brash and hot-headed nature is that living in the shadow of his biological father, Gol D. Roger, has caused him to always be shamed and live a life with a constant chip on his shoulder. And it's another set of poetic irony that the son of the freest man in the world, the Pirate King, is a slave to that same legacy. At least, all of this is what I originally thought when I read this for the first time. But what if I told you that interpretation isn't entirely correct? At least from my opinion and interpretation with hindsight. So I'll avoid spoilers, but yeah, let's kind of get into this. So many fans believe that Ace brought this entire situation on himself because of his hot-headedness and impulsive attitude, which he is, for sure. And even Garp back in Impel Down said to him, "Why couldn't you have just been a Marine?" To which Ace replies something to the effect of, "Do you think the Marines would have accepted me with the blood flowing through me?" And when this line was said, we originally assumed it was referring to Dragon, but he was talking about, it turns out to be way worse and more powerful than we could have ever imagined after learning that his true father was Gol D. Roger and that the Marines already knew that. Ace was correct here. Like, there's no way in hell the Marines would have allowed Ace to join the Marines. Like, they would have immediately killed him on the spot. And so Garp's sort of idealisticness is very dumb here, because I don't know what he was thinking. But anyways, that's aside from the point. So Ace's life was already kind of limited in terms of freedom just due to the sheer fact of his bloodline. Well, now, when you look back at that mini flashback scene of a young Ace asking Garp if it was okay for him to be born, Garp says that it depends on how he chooses to live his life and only time will tell. And while that's good advice, it is a bit lost on someone in Ace's specific situation. Between that and the way we see people treat Ace and his lineage, what choice was Ace really given other than becoming a pirate? The other thing that people often point to in this moment is how pride and ego got the better of him in this moment. And while that is certainly understandable to think that way about Ace in this moment, to that I will say come back to this scene after watching more of the series, because you will see this moment and this decision specifically in a completely brand new light. I think that's why some people find Ace's character unsatisfying, because they watch this scene, and while it leaves a huge impact on them in terms of their memory, for many who don't dive into One Piece or don't rewatch it, it's harder to make those connections. And this is one of those moments that absolutely needs to be revisited with hindsight to truly appreciate its impact and understanding Ace. Like, I will briefly discuss this in the spoilers section, but I won't dive too far into it, as we will get into it when we get to that moment in the story later on. But yeah, definitely revisit this scene, because there is a very significant and almost explicit reason why Ace does this action. And it's pretty understandable. Like, it doesn't come across so much as a very stupid and brash decision, more of a very conscious and very thought out reasoning why Ace did this. But unfortunately, Ace's Meta powers are no match for Akainu's Magu Magu powers, leaving him burned and on the ground. Then the most tragically and shocking and unthinkable thing happens. Akainu instead targets Luffy, who's now too weak to even stand at this point. With no other choice, Ace throws himself in between him and Akainu's attack and takes a massive magma fist to the chest, and in all likelihood, a fatal wound. And I never in my wildest predictions thought that Ace would not be saved here in this arc. Like, this is a shonen manga series. Sure, characters die, but not like this. They were usually, old-timer mentors, or if the younger characters died, they were side characters. Or in the case of, like, One Piece's predecessor, Dragon Ball, they always had sort of the titular Dragon Balls or some way to wish people back to life. And this was just a massive shock, to the point where I couldn't believe what I was reading. And I remember just sitting there in cold, stunned silence at what I just seen for like a good few minutes, trying to process it. And I mean, we just saw them save Ace, and they were going to get away, and everything was going to be all right. So he can't die, right? Like, but at the same time, how the hell is he going to survive a pizza-sized hole burnt straight into his chest? Like, how could Oda do this to such a beloved character? This comes out of nowhere, too. I mean, it's so shocking, and most people, I mean, you watch reaction videos of people watching this scene on YouTube, and it's still impactful and powerful. Like, it just catches everyone off guard, especially with the fact that, like, not even an episode earlier, it's all happy. It just comes out of nowhere, I feel like. And the episode ends there, and you as the viewer are completely beside yourself, needing to know what happens next. And unfortunately for us, we will need to wait for the next podcast to get into the aftermath with some of the crazier things still yet to happen in this insane arc. As if the death of Ace wasn't crazy enough, there's still at least a handful of insane things still left to happen in this war, if you can believe that. But that's where we'll end it here. And if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates on when I post new episodes, or see some pictures of my manga collection. And yeah, I appreciate those of you who have left messages on the Instagram and Spotify accounts. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that. And I do enjoy seeing those. And so thank you very much. And yeah, as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Small spoiler section, like I mentioned, but if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so spoiler section. So this will be pretty much spoilers until Egghead Island. So this is pretty much full spoilers. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was the little comment that I made about how he got his third chance with Kobe and Helmeppo, because obviously his first chance to produce people that could change the Marines was Luffy and Ace, which he failed. But they were, in fact, we learned, the second choice, because prior to that, he tried to mentor Kuzan, who, would later on go on to become Aokiji, the admiral, and then the commander, or one of the Titanic commanders of the Blackbeard Pirates now, which is kind of weird to say still. But yeah, I think there was a point where Garp was always trying to find new people to instill change in the Marines because he knew how flawed it was. We clearly know that he doesn't like the top. He hates serving the Celestial Dragons, which is why he never chose to become an admiral or the Fleet Admiral, even though he had the strength and the prestige to do it. And so, yeah, it's just, it's cool that he's finally got it right with Kobe and Helmeppo. And I think Kobe will eventually, like I've said many times, will eventually go on to become someone who does change the Marines for good or comes up with something different altogether. Some sort of an organization that will actually serve people and to protect them. Now, the other thing that I wanted to discuss in the spoiler section is, of course, that moment I mentioned where we learn later on why Ace didn't run in this point. And at the time when you first read it, it seemed really stupid for Ace to get caught up in that. And even after it's still frustrating to watch Ace stop there because they were as good as free. Yet, I think Ace knew what that situation meant because we would later on go on to see in the flashback with Ace and Luffy and Sabo, and particularly that confrontation in the Great Terminal with Blue Jam while it's all set ablaze. There's that same moment where Ace decides not to run away and stay behind, and then of course Dadan stays behind with him as well to face down Blue Jam, while everyone else, including Luffy, they run away. And later on, after they return, after like a couple, it seems like a day or a couple days, and Dadan asks Ace why he didn't run, and we learn the reason why. And it's because he gets this feeling that if he doesn't stand his ground, the people behind him will be in danger and that he can't accept that. And we learn in a flashback, within the flashback, that Garp explains to Dadan that Roger was like that as well. And so it's something that he basically inherited from Roger unknowingly. And yeah, so when we look at that moment in the present, from that perspective, you understand why Ace doesn't run, because who's behind him? It's Luffy. And Luffy is now in an even more precarious situation because he's spent. He can't move, his knees are buckling, and there's no one left to protect him between him and Akainu. And so what does Ace do? He decides to stop. And I think in retrospect, I don't know if I would flat out call it the right decision, but I understand it. Like Ace knows how powerful Akainu is, and that there's really no getting away from him unless Ace stands his ground. Now, it's still frustrating that Ace stops and it leads to his death. But I mean, it's a story. But we can't really change it. That's how it's supposed to be. But at the same time, after you see that flashback, you really do understand where Ace is coming from, and it doesn't seem as stupid as it seems when you originally read it. Of course, we'll dive into this a little bit more, probably in, I don't know, like 4 or 5 more episodes. Well, it's probably more like 6 more podcast episodes, but until we get to that specific moment. But yeah, we'll definitely dive more into this when we get into the Luffy Ace Sabo flashback and see, everything that leads up to that moment, as well as what happens post that moment. But it's a very significant, interesting bit of information that we don't get till after Ace is dead. And I've talked about this in the past, but I always wondered. I think it was the right decision to put that flashback after Ace's death, but I also think it would have been interesting to have that prior to his death as well, because then you get that sort of more attachment to Ace, and it explains why he does certain things, why he feels certain ways. Because without the context of that entire flashback of him and Luffy's relationship, where Sabo fits into this, where his relationship to Roger as well as Garp fits into all of that, like, you get all that context. And that's why, so when you read that flashback and then go back and watch this, as well as some of the other stuff we learn about Ace as well, with his time in Wano that we get to see much, much later on, when you put all that together and then you watch Marineford, it hits you like a freaking truck. I will admit, like, when I first read this and I watched Marineford and see Ace die, like, Ace's death, I was definitely one of those people where Ace's death didn't hit me as hard because I wasn't as attached to this character. I thought he was a cool character, but I wasn't necessarily as emotionally attached as some people were because I just didn't think we had enough time to be with him. But now that I do have that and I rewatch this, Ace's death, especially upon this rewatch and reread, it did hit me a lot harder. I don't remember feeling this emotional upon watching Ace's death. And I think it's because I've now gotten to know Ace a lot more and I understand why he does what he does, why he thinks the way he thinks, and where his motivations lie. And then to see that in addition to what we learn about Whitebeard during the Oden flashback, is all of it is pretty crucial. And I again, I love how retroactively the scenes later on in the series make earlier scenes way better. Like, this hits so much. I mean, it hit really good originally, but it hits even more after you've seen all that. And so, yeah, I do think that this was handled, I think, the best way possible. Anyways, that's just my ramblings about all of that, but I thank you for staying around and listening, but I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya.